This is Chapter 4 of Serendipity Lost, Eden and Its Consequences by Mark Ajita. The first book of the off-course texts. A series of philosophical reflections on the big here and the long now. The public's attitudes, assumptions, ideas, or prejudices result from definite influences. One must try to find out what they are in any situation in which one is working. Edward Bernays, The Engineering of Consent, 1947. Chapter 4, Public Relations in Ancient Civilizations. The first great kings and priests of history invented public relations. Now the term public relations is typically credited to the advertising guru Edward Bernays, who defined the term in 1923 as persuasion directed at the public to modify attitudes and actions, and efforts to integrate attitudes and actions of an institution with its publics. So how does that apply to civilizations of certainty? Well, to begin with, agriculture promised to reduce uncertainty. The religions that came along with agriculture were even more concerned with promising subjects all kinds of rewards in return for obedience and making these, often imaginary, rewards seem certain. When economists talk about religion, uncertainty reduction is central. For instance, economist Michael Hector explains that the choice of belonging to a religion is best viewed as a psychologically calculated response to life in an uncertain world. He points out that it is because, in the long term, no individual, quote, can make the future more certain by his or her actions alone, that the desire to reduce uncertainty impels actors to bind themselves to courses of action that are largely independent of future states of the world. This is the kind of uncertainty reduction that religion can provide. More than any other good, religion can offer relief from existential uncertainties about the meaning of life and about death and its aftermath. These are the primary uncertainties of life. To the extent that a religion enunciates a clear vision about the meaning of life by providing a hierarchy of values, it reduces actors' uncertainty in making critical life choices. This indeed is a reason why people are attracted to religious groups. Economists of religion like Hector have inquired why it is that people would believe in the kinds of things we associate with religious tradition. The answer that these economists have come up with is that religions allow people to expect rewards, particularly regarding death and its aftermath, with a kind of certainty that never applies to verifiable rewards. Food, wealth, or power, for instance. This explanation of the psychological rewards of religion was built up around an idea that economic sociologists Rodney Stark and William Bainbridge first called religious compensators in their 1989 A Theory of Religion. More recently, Randall Collins accurately defined the role of uncertainty in what Stark and Bainbridge dubbed religious compensators. Collins wrote, "People prefer real rewards, but sometimes they cannot get them. A generalized compensator is an imaginary reward, a substitute for unavailable earthly rewards, framed in a way that makes it impossible to unambiguously evaluate the possibility of. Such are the general compensators of eternal life, heavenly bliss, and moral superiority. There are also specific compensators, substituting for particular rewards, magical means for attaining health, love, success, revenge, and the like. Religion and magic are two overlapping forms of social exchange in which individuals purchase compensators according to their level of demand and at the best rate available. So upon this contemporary analysis, people join up with religion in order to reap the psychological benefits of reducing uncertainty about life to a level that is only possible with the promises of a peculiar kind of reward. Religion's rewards, compensators, must be, quote, framed in a way that makes it impossible to unambiguously evaluate the possibility of obtaining it. The compensators, whose reality is impossible to unambiguously evaluate, appeal to, quote, rational choice only in the sense that belief in these compensators seems to address a clear psychological desire, the desire for absolute uncertainty reduction. When humans are committed to reaping these psychologically based rewards, religion provides them with a rationale that assures them that they will acquire these rewards. Merely acknowledging, however, that the paradoxical certainty offered by religion tends to frame rewards, quote, in a way that makes it impossible to unambiguously evaluate the possibility of obtaining them, still misses an important point. There is a complex social dynamic that underlies who grants compensators and who accepts them, and the existence of religion has a history. On the supply side, religion was a tool for civilization builders. Religions of certainty made good outcomes in return for obedience to priestly rule seem less uncertain to those who were subject to priestly economic control. As Bainbridge, the sociologist who devised the concept of the compensator, pointed out about his idea in a more recent work, in no society have the means to gain rewards, nor the capacity to become a desired exchange partner, been equally distributed amongst all the members of the society. He writes, powerful people, those with great control over the rewards they can obtain through exchanges, are able to get more than their equal share of some limited rewards, and this fact is a major dynamic of social inequality. In the absence of a desired reward, people will often accept algorithms that explain how to get the reward in the distant future or in some other context that cannot be immediately verified. These algorithms are compensators, in that they compensate the individual psychologically for lack of reward. Typically, they are promises that the reward can be obtained. Rewards vary in terms of how specific or general they are, and in terms of how readily they can be verified empirically. Here, Bainbridge's discussion of compensators evidently applies to the kinds of algorithms that marketers supply to consumers to increase demand and reinforce the consumer's idea of a particular firm or brand as a valued exchange partner. Bainbridge further generalizes the idea of religious compensators in a way that could equally well describe the relationship between powerful companies and the consumers who buy their products today. Humans seek many kinds of rewards, some of which cannot readily be obtained by any lone individual. Rewards like food or fun get used up and must be sought again and again. Thus we learn to seek particular rewards through exchanges with particular other individuals or categories of people. Someone who is a frequent source of rewards, and to whom we give rewards in return, is an exchange partner. When we need a reward of a particular kind and cannot readily provide it for ourselves, we go to a valued exchange partner, especially one who has provided similar rewards in the past. The firm, religious or otherwise, seeks to enhance their appearance as a valued exchange partner. Valued exchange partners set the agenda for how to achieve desired rewards. From a basic economic perspective, Bainbridge says, one very important kind of instrumental reward is information about how to obtain a desired reward. This is another way of saying that algorithms can be valuable, and humans often seek them. Frequently, the best source of information is another person. Thus, we have the algorithm. When in need of an algorithm, ask a valued exchange partner. Bainbridge's formulation helps us to make the essential connection between today's consumer societies and early civilizations. The connection implied by Bainbridge from marketing in an economic marketplace to compensator distribution in a religious marketplace should already be apparent. Today, the goal of marketers is to help a firm become a valued exchange partner with consumers, just as early states sought to become valued partners with their subjects through distribution of compensators. A key way to become a valued exchange partner is to provide people with a plan, an algorithm, a way of getting what they want, or at least a way of helping people imagine that they are on the way to getting what they want. We ought not miss that formative historical moment where compensatory religions and systems of religious uncertainty reduction first gained momentum in response to the needs of both buyers and sellers in early history. Religion was, first of all, an algorithm that helped laborers accept obedience to the economic rule of priests. At first it seems hard to relate to the civilizations of certainty, where ritual governed everything. But we can both compare and contrast religion and certainty-oriented civilizations with marketing and the economic decisions we make today. Think about the algorithm, as Bainbridge puts it, for contemporary commercial PR. Not for religious products, just for regular products. I do not buy Coke or Pepsi simply because I like the advertisements. Yet neither would the beverages known as Coke or Pepsi even exist today if these products had not been reimagined, packaged, and promoted through a vast set of image associations shaped by marketing and public relations. More generally, one chooses a product based on an algorithm that leads us to expect the momentary satisfaction of basic desires that a product provides. Part of this is an expectation of real rewards: sweetness, bubbles, vanilla essence, caramel color, the feel of the packaging, etc. But the algorithm that advertisers give us to understand the experience of cola will combine those real rewards, good taste, texture, etc., with a promise to integrate the buyer into a broader image. This is where the compensator comes in. We expect and imagine that we are getting more from a well-marketed product than we can be sure that we are getting. In part, we do expect that the product will make us cooler, better, younger, more interesting, etc. Now, whether a cola beverage will really satisfy my desire for taste is a matter of risk. I may buy the cola and find it was not exactly what I wanted. What I want may change before I bring that glass to my lips. What if I get hungry first, or horny, or instead I realize what I really want is to pet cute little puppy? But this uncertainty about a product meeting my expectations is mitigated by a compensatory logic that marketers provide. The imaginings that I will be part of something greater, cooler, and more important than this single act of consumption is not a matter of risk when I drink the cola. Marketers subtly reinforce real expectations with promises of satisfaction that are simply framed in a way that makes it impossible to unambiguously evaluate the possibility of obtaining it. Compensators, as described by religious economist Randall Collins. The notion of belonging to a community of consumers, improved self-image, and even a sense of ironic detachment from the importance of the quality of the product all help along the choice to purchase the product. Ambiguous assertions, impossible to verify assertions about the value of the product reduce the real risk of dissatisfaction involved in the purchase of the product. Compensators enhance the algorithm that leads us to buy from our preferred exchange partners, brands. One can be fairly sure that a Pepsi, a Macintosh, or an IKEA chair, or a Gibson guitar are going to deliver some degree of satisfaction, but how satisfying the product will be is always uncertain. The PR images, though, that surround a product make the chances of some kind of satisfaction seem that much closer to certainty in the mind of the consumer. Most of all, advertisements hinge on a certain image that the consumer develops about the status to be gained by association with the product on sale. With that in mind, consider that it is no exaggeration to say that the early civilizations, the first certainty-oriented civilizations, were the first consumer societies. Of course, many of the subjects were often brutally enslaved, and they were not choosing from among a vast array of goods and services like those we know today. Still, we ought to call them societies of state consumerism. They were societies where, in a sense, participation in the state's redistribution primarily of grain products, was the main form of consumption. Citizens were consumers of a state. In other words, precisely the idea of asymmetrical exchange, where power over decisions regarding redistribution is entirely localized on one side of the asymmetry. In these great civilizations, redistribution did not mean equalization of resources. Redistribution meant hoarding of surpluses by the elite and elite control over how this surplus would be rationed out to everyone else. The citizens of these societies became passive consumers of the agenda set by those who held priestly caste status. The slaves of these societies were merely subsistence-level consumers, but they were the consumers, at the cost of their own corvée labor, consumers of the redistributive state. A corollary here is that consumer societies and capitalist societies are not necessarily the same thing. These first and greatest consumer societies of history, these early civilizations, were unlikely to be called capitalist by any definition. But in early civilizations, ritualized consumption was enhanced by religious compensators. Today's marketing and PR experts provide consumers with an algorithm that improves the consumer's assessments of the rewards to be gained in buying a product. Archaic religion could potentially transform. Now, certainty-oriented civilizations provided people with the chance to live in a society where scarcity was less likely than in foraging societies. Religions in certainty-oriented civilizations enhanced the perception of what was a mere decrease in the probability of deadly scarcity. Divine rewards were guaranteed even when the economic agenda barely satisfied the subsistence needs of subjects. The methods of discretionary redistribution and rationing was not the same in every society. The extent of what priests required of their subjects, the percentage of what we might refer to as gross domestic product of these societies, must have varied considerably as well, even across a single civilization's history. What people got to keep for themselves, apart from the state's redistributive economy, also varied. Did they get to trade and have markets outside of what the high priests would take to state granaries? Well, that probably varied as well. The influential 20th century economic historian Karl Polanyi was the most well-known advocate for the idea that these early civilizations were marketless. His idea was that these economies were subject entirely and absolutely to temple control. More recent commentators have emphasized that this was not exactly the case. The contemporary economic historian of bourgeois capitalism, Deirdre McCloskey, for instance, has gone so far as to argue that these societies may have themselves had a real equivalent of bourgeois classes in the modern West. There was room for markets, prices, and trading, both interstate and intrastate, in the economies of early civilizations, according to McCloskey. But even in accounts that stress the inclusion of entrepreneurship in temple economies of early history, these traders internal to the state were almost always subject to the discretion of priestly financing. It is true that few believe today, as per Karl Polanyi, that every last bit of agricultural yield was deposited directly into the state's grain silos to be taken under control of the priests and kings. Still, the better part of the grain was probably appropriated by large states. What we think of today as an economy was underground in early civilizations. It was through the economic and political glue of certainty provided by archaic religious ritual in its many and essentially arbitrary forms that these states managed to expand in territory, population, and duration. Priestly leadership reproduced itself over time by relying on stable rituals along with organizational and agricultural knowledge. Everyone was renting their productive resources from the king. And it is not unreasonable to imagine that priest-kings did all they could to get their hands on whatever they could control. For all intents and purposes, the heads of states of the early empires reserved the right to intervene into whatever aspect of the economy they saw fit. Remember, however, that these civilizations lacked the precise technologies we have today for repeatable measurement, information transmission, and record-keeping. Little bits and pieces of economic control would always escape the grasp of priests and kings. The promises given by religions of certainty carried people through some of the bad times. During the widely shared rewards of prosperous economic times, of climactically favorable times, archaic religion's compensators may have been largely unnecessary to keep subjects obedient. Still, even in prosperous times, archaic religion would have provided the supernatural rationale to convince everyone that agricultural yields would persist in the perpetual future due to a divine will beyond question. Hence, through the rough years, people would continue providing their contributions of life and labor on an asymmetric basis in the hopes that life would improve again. Just as no advertisement that fails to encourage consumers to buy the advertised product is going to be funded by the company that makes the product, no religious belief, nor any religious belief or ritual that did not support and expand the command hierarchy of certainty-oriented civilizations could have survived for long. Ultimately, the product that all archaic religions were ostensibly selling was membership in the command hierarchy, with a priestly class in control of planning and rationing society's agricultural goods. The economic powers in these societies fought like their lives depended on it, against publicly acknowledging the reality of uncertainty or serendipity. They did everything they could to suppress the idea that their authority was uncertain. The artifacts of archaic religion that we can observe today were the result of this struggle to make participation under risk, that is to say where there was a probability of succeeding or failing, of benefiting or losing out, into conditions where subjects would certainly be rewarded. If not in this life, then in the next. For the elites of civilizations of certainty, such a struggle very likely included massively inflating their own idea of their own significance in the economic life of the societies they claimed to rule. Religion's raison d'être in the early civilizations of certainty was the accommodation of the human species, who were serendipity-oriented by nature, into a world where certainty was the rule and where certainty was the primary reward. However, the writers of Eden spat in the face of all that. What we'll see in the next chapter is that Taoism in China reveals even more about this fundamental moment of rupture from civilizations of certainty. That moment that Karl Jaspers called the axial turn, from which all contemporary religions emerge. Taoism provides essential lessons about how to accept uncertainty and embrace serendipity. The brilliant paradoxical formulations of Taoism demonstrate that the rebellions against public relations in civilizations of certainty, beginning 3 millennia ago, are the roots of our modernity. This has been Public Relations in Ancient Civilizations, Chapter 4 of Serendipity Lost, Eden and its Consequences. Up next is Chapter 5, Tao in Eden.